Hi viewers, it's Ms Fabregas here, bringing you another TGS English post. This time it's on question 2. So Ms Harvey's covered question 4 of language paper 1. I'm covering question 2. This question is the analysis question. So it's also known as the we do this all the time question, because you will be used to the way you have to write this from what you have done in literature so far. So with your 19th century novel, with your modern play, you will be analysing the language just like you have to in this question as well. So it's the second question on the paper, and the typical sentence stem for it is, how does the writer use language here to create an impression of the fill in the blanks? So essentially we are really engaging with the language. There are some opportunities to explore sentence forms as well, but we will come to that in a minute. Okay, so first of all, I'm just going to show you some techniques that you might be looking for in this question. Okay, so the first one is patterns. So they are really looking for you to make links across the extract that you're given and think about patterns of different words, anything at all really that you can find. So that could be word choices, so patterns of verbs, adjectives, etc. Could also be metaphors, so when something is something. Similes, something as or like something. Personification, so when obviously an object is given, human qualities. Repetition, so that can link into patterns, so when things are repeated across the extract. Imagery, so are any images being created for us as readers for a particular purpose? Emotive language, are we as readers positioned to feel something? Could be for a certain character or a certain situation, so you might want to bring in sympathy here or empathy also. Tone, is there a specific tone being created? If so, why? Always thinking about what the writer is doing. Contrast, is the extract providing us with certain contrast, and why is that? And also sentence forms, lengths. This one though you've got to be really careful with, because you've got to think about why the writer does use potentially shorter sentences or longer complex sentences. You need to have something really perceptive to say about that. I would say try and avoid the writer uses longer sentence here to make us read on. That is a bit of an empty sentence, doesn't really mean anything, it's not very clear. You have to be as coherent and concise as possible. If you really think the writer is using short sentences to create a particular tension, to create an abruptness to the writing, then you need to say that, but you need to be really careful about what you say. So talk about it if you've got something really nice to infer. If you're not sure, just stick to the language. Okay, some more top tips for you. Have a clear point that responds to the question. I say this to my class all the time, but the best phrase that you can use really is the writer, or if we know the writer's name, we'll use the writer's name, but the writer uses, here's the technique, this technique, put in your quotation, in order to, because that really responds to the question. You are thinking about the language and the effect of the language, okay? Include well-chosen, precise quotations. So really think about looking across the extract for your quotations. Try and pick out specific words, really zoom in on that language rather than using big portions of the text for your quotations. Really pick out specific quotes. Explain the effects of the language choices you have observed. So really zooming in there, really thinking about what the writer suggests, what the writer evokes, what the writer implies, using your own verbs there to really help you with your analysis. One paragraph should likely contain more than one piece of evidence. So please make sure you're using multiple quotations in your paragraphs, not just one per paragraph. We really want to see you engaging with the language. Use the writer's name. Lots of people don't do this, they just say the writer does this. We're given the name, so we're going to look at the specimen paper, which is Daphne du Maurier. So, right, du Maurier uses verbs in order to blah, blah, blah. You've got to really think about sounding confident, and also it will help your analysis sound confident, so make sure you do that too. And use appropriate terminology, but do not go overboard. If you're talking about verbs, you do not have to introduce every single word with the verb this, the verb this, the verb this. Sounds slightly too repetitive, a little bit clunky, so be careful there. But obviously use appropriate terminology. We understand that you might have a little bit of a mind blank at stages and not remember if something is an adjective, noun, verb. If you don't remember and you're not sure, it is best actually not to guess. We want you to sound like you know what you're talking about. So if you need to use the word and then put in your quotation, please do so if you're not sure. Obviously, it's preferable to use appropriate terminology and specific terminology, but if you really cannot remember, word or lexical choice will be fine. Okay, so here is a question 2 example. You will see that they actually give you the extract they want you to look at rather, on the page. So we're dealing here with lines 8 to 18, and that is the extract below. This means that you don't actually need to consult the source and go back through the source. It's here for you, which is fantastic. And then you need to think about, what am I actually looking for? So here is the question. How does the writer use language here to describe the effects of the weather? So we know this question is all about the language the writer is using. It's du Maurier. We know the writer is du Maurier. And it's all about the weather as well. Then we're going to think about what you could include in your answer. So again, the examiners tell you it's words and phrases, language features and techniques, and then different sentence forms as well. After that, you're going to want to go through that extract and attack it with your highlighter and your pen. So you need those two things with you, and you need to be thinking, what can I find here to talk about? Okay, so metaphors, similes, etc. And try and find patterns. So we really want you to focus on patterns, and that's actually what I'm going to look at today, just to give you a little head start. Okay, so here is the extract, and as you can see, I've already highlighted patterns throughout it, and I've specifically looked at verbs. So we've got shaking, trembled, swayed, rocking, plodded, creaked, groaned, sank. All of these verbs do create a particular tone for the reader. But what I want you to do now is I want you yourself to pause this video. I've started you off with verbs, but I want you now to think about what you would highlight. Can you find anything else? Metaphors, similes, personification, that it is in here, it is in this extract. So I want you to pause now and think, what would I write about? Okay, so hopefully you have thought about what you're writing about. And I just want to return to the top tips, because now I want you to think about writing the question. So I'm going to leave this slide up here for you whilst you write, but I want you to think about, what is the first thing I'm going to comment on? Is it going to be the verbs? Is it going to be a simile that I found? What is du Maurier doing, and why is she doing it, essentially? Okay, so I want you to pause now and try and give your writing a go. If you are timing yourself, 12 to 15 minutes is what you'll have in the exam to write this question. So give yourself that amount of time to write it, try and do it, and then we will go through a model paragraph together. Okay, pause now. Okay, so hopefully you have written your own answer to the question, and I'm sure they're all fantastic. But I just thought I would go through a model paragraph written to show you what it should hopefully sound like. So I'm just going to read this model paragraph, and then we will go through it. So du Maurier uses verbs to emphasize the power the weather has over the horse and coach. The coach trembled, swayed, and rocked. These dynamic verbs suggest wild movements that are uncontrollable, highlighting the weather's influence and destructive nature. As the weather continues to affect the journey, the wheels creaked and groaned as they sank. The verbs used now personify the coach, evoking sympathy for not only the people on board, but the horses and transportation, as it appears in pain and very vulnerable to the weather. Sank captures the pessimistic tone of this piece. The oral imagery here portrays the coach as a victim to the weather's cruel torment. So you can see this answer is really focused on techniques and thinking about what is suggested. So the techniques I have picked up on in this paragraph are verbs, dynamic verbs, verbs again, personify, so personification, the pessimistic tone that's created, oral imagery, so actually imagery that we can almost hear. And you will see that I have actually used verbs myself in order to analyze these techniques. So I've said to emphasize, to suggest, highlighting, evoking, portrays, so portraying. So all of these sorts of words, including things like implies, those kind of words are really, really useful when you're analysing. You can really think about what you can extrapolate from the language, okay? Hopefully this is a clear guide as to what you can write and how you can write it. If you do have any questions, obviously you can email your teachers about those, but hopefully this was a short guide to how to approach question 2.